He wasn't asking for freedom. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. His final wish before facing the execution chamber was heartbreakingly simple: to see the dog that had been his only comfort through years of injustice. But behind that wish lies something far darker than anyone imagined. This is not just the story of a man on death row, it's the story of how prejudice and hatred can strip away everything, even innocence itself. What happened when that wish was granted changed more than one life forever. It started in the most ordinary way. David Carter grew up in a small southern town where cracked sidewalks told stories of generations before him, and quiet evenings smelled of pine trees and fried food drifting through open windows. Despite the weight of poverty and prejudice that shadowed his community, David carried hope. He was known for his gentle spirit, for the way stray dogs seemed to follow him home, and for how he believed kindness could outlive hate. Life wasn't easy, opportunities were scarce, and every step forward seemed blocked by walls others never had to climb. Yet David pressed on, cooking meals with his mother, fixing bikes for neighborhood kids, and dreaming of one day opening a repair shop of his own. To those who knew him, he was more than just another young black man in a town that refused to see beyond skin. He was a son, a neighbor, a friend, and above all, a man stubborn enough to keep faith in a world often stacked against him. But beneath that quiet strength, the storm was building. One encounter, one accusation, born not from truth but from prejudice, would unravel everything he had fought to hold together. And when the system turned against him, that same gentle heart, the one that only wanted peace, would be thrown into a nightmare he could never have imagined. His story wasn't headed toward justice. It was heading toward a final request no man should ever have to make. The break in David's fragile peace came suddenly, with the same brutality that had scarred so many generations before him. One evening, a store downtown was robbed. The thief was gone before anyone saw a face, but he wore the same color jacket David had been seen in days earlier. That single detail, flimsy, circumstantial, meaningless, was all it took. Whispers spread faster than truth. Within hours, David's name was whispered in hallways, muttered in churches, passed from mouth to mouth like a poison. To them, he was guilty not because of evidence, but because of how easily their minds could place a black man in chains. He didn't even know he was being hunted until it was too late. As he walked home that night, a line of headlights cut across the street, blinding him. Police cars. Doors slammed. Commands flew from angry voices. "On the ground! Hands where we can see them!" He froze, his heart pounding, mouth opening to explain, but no sound came. He hadn't done anything. Not now, not ever. Still, knees pressed into his back, cold metal clamped around his wrists, and within minutes he was shoved into the back of a squad car. Neighbors peeked through curtains, shaking their heads, not at the injustice, but in resignation, as though this ending had long been written. In the interrogation room, truth meant nothing. Officers weren't looking for answers. They were shaping a story. They asked leading questions, twisting his words, ignoring his pleas. An attorney appointed to defend him looked more eager to leave than to fight. His protests were buried under paperwork, his innocence silenced by signatures on pages he hadn't even understood. By the time the trial began, the verdict might as well have been etched in stone. Witnesses who had never seen his face swore they had. A jury unwilling to question their own bias found comfort in condemning him. And above it all, the prosecutor painted David as something he wasn't: a criminal, a danger, a threat, using the color of his skin as the loudest piece of evidence. Each day in court felt like a performance where the conclusion was already scripted. David sat shackled, listening as strangers erased the truth of his life and replaced it with lies, while his words vanished into the void. When the gavel finally struck, the sound echoed like a death knell. Guilty. The sentence was worse than he could imagine. Death. Not just the loss of years he'd never live, but the finality, the stripping away of every dream, every hope, reduced to a countdown clock. He was 27 years old, and still, as walls closed in, his spirit clung to one sliver of humanity. Behind the fences in the small prison yard where guards rarely looked, he had found a companion, a stray dog that wandered against the wire. Through scraps fed under the fence, through quiet moments shared, that animal had become his anchor. Now, as the system marched him toward the end, all he wanted was to see that dog one last time. A simple human wish in the shadow of injustice. But what happened when that wish reached the ears of those in power would unravel in ways no one could have predicted. The day of David's final request arrived under a gray sky, as if even the heavens carried the weight of what was about to unfold. Shackled at the wrists and ankles, he was led through the cold corridor, each step echoing like a countdown. The guards whispered about him in tones too casual for a man walking toward death. To them it was routine. To David it was the last thread of dignity left to grasp. In the small yard behind the prison, the dog was waiting. Thin, tail wagging, eyes wide with recognition. The animal pressed against the fence, as though it understood the weight of this fragile reunion. For the first time in months, David's expression broke. Pain, love, and relief tangled all at once. He knelt as far as chains allowed, pressing his forehead to the wire, whispering silent prayers only the dog could hear. But even in that sacred, fleeting moment, the cruelty of the world refused to stay silent. A group of onlookers gathered past the fence. Some activists who had begged for his release, others who came out of morbid curiosity. One voice shouted, "This is justice!" Another threw a stone that clattered near the fence, startling the animal. The guards laughed as if the suffering unfolding before them was entertainment. David's tears streaked down his face, not because of fear of dying, but because of the realization that prejudice had stolen more than his life. It had poisoned every chance of being seen for who he truly was. As the guards pulled him away, the dog barked frantically, claws scraping the dirt, trying to follow. David turned one last time, lips trembling with words swallowed by the clank of his chains. This was the truth of injustice, not only the silencing of a man, but the erasure of his humanity in front of the very world that allowed it. And yet, in that piercing cry of a desperate animal, something powerful sparked. When the cell door finally closed behind David that night, the echoes of the barking still carried through the concrete walls. The dog's cries were silenced by distance, but in David's mind they replayed, a haunting reminder that even in a world determined to strip him of his dignity, something pure still saw him as worthy of love. Days later, the execution went forward. No confession, no evidence that truly tied him to the crime, no justice, just a system that decided his life was easier to discard than to defend. His story ended not in the courtroom, not in the prison yard, but in a quiet chamber where statistics consume names, and injustice cloaks itself in legality. But outside those walls, his story did not disappear. Activists shared his final wish. Newspapers printed the image of a man shackled beside a loyal animal, separated by a fence. That image spread further than any verdict, becoming a symbol of both unimaginable cruelty and unbroken humanity. People began asking how many others had been silenced. How often had lives been stolen under the mask of justice? David Carter's final act exposed more than the tragedy of one life. It revealed the brutal efficiency of a system meant to punish, but too often weaponized against the color of one's skin. His quiet love for a stray dog became a louder testimony than any defense lawyer could give, that in the face of hatred, there was still tenderness. In the face of injustice, still truth. And as that story lingers, the question cannot be ignored. How many more lives will be chained, erased, and forgotten before we demand a world where justice isn't decided by skin color? The answer is not in his absence. It's in what we choose to do now.